The letter arrived without warning, its crimson seal gleaming in the moonlight. An invitation to Ashford Manor, a place steeped in history, mystery, and as I would soon discover, death. A simple message written in elegant script. No signature, no explanation, just the promise of a challenge. But as I, Hercule Poirot, set foot in that grand foreboding house, I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would be as it seemed. And before the night was through, I would be called to solve a mystery far darker than I could have ever imagined. Chapter 1. The Invitation. It was a most curious morning when the letter arrived. I, Hercule Poirot, was seated in my modest yet tastefully arranged study, the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the scent of old books. My thoughts were occupied with matters of lesser importance, namely the ongoing case of a missing heirloom ring, but this, as I would soon discover, was not to be a day like any other. The letter came by post, sealed with a dark crimson wax. The seal, though unremarkable to the casual observer, caught my eye immediately. It bore a symbol I knew well, a lion's head, proud and regal. It was a sign I had encountered in the past, and the memory of it stirred an uneasy sensation in the pit of my stomach. I broke the seal with a precision that spoke to years of practice, and unfolded the crisp, cream-colored paper within. The letter was short, but the words were anything but ordinary. Monsieur Poirot, you are invited to a gathering at Ashford Manor on the 15th of October. A mystery awaits your unparalleled intellect. It will be a night of revelation. Yours sincerely, an admirer. I read it once more and then again, for I do not trust the fleeting first impression. Every word was carefully chosen, every sentence designed to pique my curiosity, and pique it did. I leaned back in my chair, my fingers steepled in my usual thoughtful pose. A mystery, I mused, the best kind. Not the ordinary kind that involves thieves or burglars, no, but something deeper, something hidden. The letter spoke of a challenge, and as you may know, I, Hercule Poirot, am not one to shy away from such things. In fact, I relish them. And yet, there was something about this invitation that did not sit right with me. The lack of any signature was suspicious. The briefness of the message, too curt for something that promised an event of such importance, and the choice of words. An admirer. Who could it be? Who would seek my attention in such a cryptic manner? But alas, I digress. I would not dwell on uncertainties, for in my experience, mysteries often arrive in the most unexpected forms. I made my decision. The next morning, I found myself standing before the grand gates of Ashford Manor, the iron bars cold and imposing. A tall, narrow house, it stood like an old sentinel watching over the rolling hills, its stone walls weathered by time. The invitation had been clear in one thing: Ashford Manor. I had no other details, but what more was needed? A challenge awaited me, one I would not turn my back on. As I approached the front door, a butler in a dark suit opened it with a polite but reserved nod. Monsieur Poirot, welcome, he said, his accent refined, his manner respectful, yet distant. Lord Ashford is expecting you. Please, come in. I was ushered into the vast, dimly lit foyer, where the shadows of portraits on the walls seemed to follow me as I walked. There was a strange stillness in the air, a tension that hung like an unspoken secret. I could not quite place it. Was it simply the weight of the manor's history, or something more? The moment was fleeting, though, and soon I was greeted by Lord Ashford himself. He was tall, with sharp features that bespoke a man of both intellect and refinement. His gaze was calculating, but beneath it there was a glimmer of something, dare I say, unsaid. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," Lord Ashford greeted me, extending a hand with the enthusiasm of one who had prepared for this moment. "I trust your journey was pleasant." I gave a courteous nod. "Pleasant enough," I replied, my eyes scanning the room for anything that might betray the true nature of this gathering. "But I must confess my curiosity is piqued. Your invitation is quite unlike any I have received before." Lord Ashford smiled, a tight-lipped smile, as though amused by the mystery I had already begun to unravel. "Indeed, monsieur, this evening shall be memorable, I assure you." He led me into a drawing room filled with guests, each one with their own peculiarities, their own air of mystery. Lady Eleanor, the widow with a cold stare and a trembling hand. Sir Reginald, the jolly baronet who could never quite mask his nervous energy. Miss Beatrice, whose quiet presence seemed both comforting and unsettling at the same time. The evening began, but my mind was not at ease. There was something beneath the surface here, something I could not yet discern. The pieces were in place, the players scattered, but what game was afoot? As the clock ticked closer to midnight, I could feel it, the strange weight of anticipation in the air, as though the manor itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, and so it would. Chapter 2. The Disappearance. The evening progressed with all the grandeur expected of such an event. The guests mingled, their conversations polite but guarded, as though each one were carefully observing the others. The grand hall of Ashford Manor, bathed in the soft glow of chandelier light, felt like a stage set for something far more dramatic than an ordinary social gathering. Lord Ashford had, no doubt, orchestrated everything with great care. The wine was plentiful, the music elegant, and the atmosphere, well, it was thick with an unspoken tension. As I surveyed the room, I could not shake the feeling that something was not quite right. It was as though the very walls of Ashford Manor were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. Lady Eleanor stood near the grand fireplace, a glass of champagne in her hand. Her eyes, however, were fixed not on the flames, but on the guest, as if she were silently judging each one. Sir Reginald, ever the jolly fellow, laughed a little too loudly, making jokes about the weather and the changing seasons. Miss Beatrice, the quiet one, sat at the edge of the room, her gaze drifting between the others as if lost in some distant thought. And then there was the man of the hour, Lord Ashford himself. His presence was commanding, yet something about him seemed off. His manner was too polished, his smile too calculated. As I glanced at him, I could not help but wonder, what was he hiding beneath that carefully constructed facade? It was then that the clock struck midnight. A shrill scream shattered the calm. The guests froze, their glasses raised midair, their smiles faltering. The scream had come from deep within the manor, Lord Ashford's study, if I wasn't mistaken. I turned to the nearest butler, who had already moved toward the door. "What has happened?" I demanded, my mind racing. "There is no time to explain, Monsieur Poirot." "Please follow me," the butler replied, his face pale. Without another word, I followed him through the grand hallway, my footsteps echoing against the cold stone floor. As I entered the study, I was greeted by a most unsettling sight. The room was in disarray, papers scattered across the floor, the heavy curtains drawn tight against the windows, blocking out the night's light. But the most troubling thing of all was the absence of Lord Ashford. He was simply gone. I looked around, my mind already working to piece together the puzzle. A broken window was wide open, the curtains billowing in the wind. Muddy footprints led from the window across the wooden floor and toward the back of the room. They stopped abruptly at the edge of the rug. It was as if someone had disappeared into thin air. "Where is Lord Ashford?" I asked, turning to the butler. I do not know, Monsieur Poirot," the man stammered. "He was here only moments ago." "I swear," I raised a hand to silence him. "The question, my good man, is not where he is, but how he has vanished. This, you see, is no ordinary disappearance." I examined the room carefully, my eyes narrowing with suspicion. The broken window, the muddy footprints, everything seemed to point to a single undeniable fact. Lord Ashford had staged his disappearance. But why? The other guests, summoned by the sound of the scream, were now gathered in the hallway, their faces etched with concern. Lady Eleanor appeared agitated, her hand trembling as she clutched her champagne glass. Sir Reginald, meanwhile, wore a forced grin, clearly trying to keep up appearances. Miss Beatrice, as always, remained composed. Too composed, in fact. "Is anyone here prepared to tell me where they were when the scream was heard?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. Lady Eleanor was the first to speak, her voice wavering. "I was in the library reading. I heard the scream and came immediately." "I was in the billiard room," Sir Reginald chimed in, his tone almost too casual. "Having a bit of a break, you know." I didn't hear anything at first, but when I came running, I saw the mess. "And Miss Beatrice?" I turned my gaze to her, noting her stillness. She seemed startled by the question, but quickly regained her composure. "I was in the garden, sketching," she said quietly, her voice soft but steady. "Ah," I said, nodding slowly. "Sketching? Yes. But I wonder, where is your sketchbook, Miss Beatrice?" Her eyes flickered for the briefest moment. "I left it by the fountain." I studied her closely, searching for any hint of deceit, but there was nothing. Nothing except the same distant, composed expression she always wore. And yet, something told me she was hiding something. As for the others, their stories seemed to fit too neatly into place, almost as if rehearsed. I paced the room, my mind churning through the possibilities. Lord Ashford had vanished. But why would he stage such an elaborate ruse? Was this a game, or something more sinister? The pieces were scattered, but one thing was clear. There was a secret lurking within the walls of Ashford Manor, and I, Hercule Poirot, would not rest until I had uncovered it. I turned to the guests, my gaze steady. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, "I have only just begun my investigation. But I promise you this. Before the night is through, the truth will be revealed." Chapter 3. Clues from the past. The events of the night had left me with far more questions than answers. Lord Ashford's sudden disappearance, the muddy footprints leading nowhere, and the strange, unsettling atmosphere of Ashford Manor. It all seemed too orchestrated, too deliberate. As I stood in the study, the fragments of the puzzle were scattered before me like pieces of a shattered mirror. But I knew one thing. To solve this mystery, I had to piece it together, slowly and carefully. The guests were dismissed to their rooms under the watchful eye of the butlers. Lady Eleanor appeared faint, her face a pale mask of concern, while Sir Reginald attempted to keep a jovial demeanor, though his forced smiles were becoming increasingly transparent. Miss Beatrice, as always, was a picture of composed serenity, though her eyes lingered too long in the shadows in the hallway. I, however, had work to do. The first thing I noticed, even before the others had left, was the peculiar manner in which the manor was designed. The grand study, where I had found the traces of Lord Ashford's disappearance, was adjacent to a narrow, dimly lit hallway. That hallway, I soon discovered, led to the private library where Lady Eleanor claimed to have been reading when the scream was heard. I had no doubt that this room would hold more answers, and so I set off, walking slowly, my mind whirring with possibilities. The library was a quiet, imposing room filled with shelves of ancient books, their leather-bound covers cracked with age. The faint scent of paper and ink lingered in the air, as though the very walls were whispering secrets. There, upon a high-backed chair near the large window, I found Lady Eleanor's book. Indeed, it was upside down, as though abandoned in haste. I studied it for a moment, my mind working over the implications. Why had she left the book in such a manner, I wondered, and then, more importantly, had she truly been reading, or had she been waiting for something to happen? I placed the book aside and turned to examine the room more closely. My eyes fell on a peculiar detail, a small, almost unnoticeable scratch in the polished wood of the floor near the fireplace. It was subtle, just a mark, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. A chair had been moved here recently, perhaps to hide something. I bent down to inspect it more closely and found a small fragment of something that appeared to be, yes, it was, part of a broken watch, lodged in the crack of the floorboard. I stood up quickly. A broken watch? That could only mean one thing. Time was significant here. Lord Ashford's disappearance had been timed precisely, and someone in this house had known it. But who? My next move was to visit the back of the house, where I had noted the footprints leading into the garden. They had disappeared just as abruptly as Lord Ashford had, but I was certain they would tell me more. The garden was sprawling, a vast expanse of carefully tended flowers and shrubs. But it was the old stone well tucked away in the corner that caught my attention. I approached it cautiously, the faintest shiver of unease running down my spine. Something about it seemed off. I crouched beside the well, peering down into its depths. There, floating just above the water's surface, was a piece of fabric. It was dark, but I could make out the distinctive stitching of a monogram, Lord Ashford's initials. I took a step back, my thoughts racing. Why would he leave a piece of his clothing by the well? Then I remembered something. Lady Eleanor had mentioned the garden earlier when she described her whereabouts during the night's events. I recalled her words with startling clarity. I was in the library reading, but I had taken a walk in the garden just before the scream. Yet, had she been in the garden at all, or had she simply planted that idea in the minds of others? I looked around, scanning the garden for any further clues. A rustling sound caught my attention, and I turned to see a small figure moving between the hedges. It was Miss Beatrice, walking with a deliberate slowness, her hands clasped behind her back. She did not see me at first, and I took the opportunity to approach her unnoticed. "Miss Beatrice," I said, my voice calm but steady. She froze, her gaze meeting mine. There was no surprise in her eyes, only a quiet acknowledgement of my presence. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "I did not expect you to find me here." "I am curious, Miss Beatrice," I replied, my eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "You were sketching, you told me. Yet you stand here in the garden, alone, as though waiting for something." Her lips parted as though she might respond, but then she closed them again, her eyes flicking nervously to the side. I was waiting for the others to arrive," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "A strange thing to wait for," I replied, "considering that it was not your arrival that was anticipated, but rather Lord Ashford's sudden disappearance. She stiffened, her gaze dropping to the ground. "I do not know what you mean," she said, her voice shaking slightly. But you do, Miss Beatrice," I interrupted, stepping closer. "You know far more than you let on." Her expression wavered, the calm demeanor slipping, if only for a moment. "I am not the one who disappeared," she said, her voice more brittle now. "Indeed," I replied, "but you may very well be the one who can explain why." I turned away from her, my mind already racing. Miss Beatrice was hiding something. Of that, I was certain. But what? And why had she been so eager to lead me to the garden, where the well awaited me? The pieces were falling into place, but I knew I had to be patient. This mystery would not be solved quickly, but it would be solved. For Hercule Poirot, the methodical detective, never leaves déchu, question unanswered. Chapter 4. The Killer Staircase. The night had grown colder by the time I returned to the manor after my brief excursion into the garden. My mind was ablaze with possibilities, yet I knew better than to rush to conclusions. The clues were scattered before me, like pieces of a complex puzzle, and it was my task to fit them together with the precision of a master craftsman. The guests had retired to their rooms, leaving the manor eerily quiet. The servants had gone to bed, and I was left alone in the vast halls, the only sound being the occasional creak of the old wooden floors beneath my feet. I found myself drawn back to the study where Lord Ashford's disappearance had begun. But this time, I was not only searching for what had been left behind, I was looking for what had been moved. As I entered the study once more, my eyes were drawn immediately to the grand staircase that spiraled upward to the upper floors. It was a staircase that seemed to dominate the room, its dark, polished wood gleaming even in the dim light. A strange thought occurred to me. Had I truly examined it closely enough? I stepped closer to the base of the stairs and studied the intricate carvings along the banister. Each detail was expertly crafted, a testament to the wealth and taste of the Ashford family. But it wasn't the craftsmanship that caught my attention. It was the subtle marks left on the steps themselves. Marks that at first glance seemed innocuous, but to a trained eye spoke volumes. One step in particular, the fourth from the bottom, had been worn down more than the others. It was barely noticeable, unless one knew to look. And I, Hercule Poirot, always know where to look. I knelt down to inspect the step closely. A faint indentation was visible, as though something or someone had placed considerable weight on it. I ran my fingers over the surface, careful not to disturb the dust that had gathered there. The worn step seemed out of place amid the otherwise pristine staircase. I stood up slowly, my mind racing. The staircase itself was important, I was sure of it. But why? What was its significance in Lord Ashford's disappearance? The answer, I realized, lay in the strange history of the manor itself. I had learned that the Ashford family had lived in this house for centuries, their wealth and influence growing with each passing generation. But there were whispers, rumors that had followed the family for years, whispers of a dark secret buried beneath the grand facade, a secret that had something to do with the manor's architecture. The grand staircase was not just a decorative feature of Ashford Manor. It was a trap, a carefully designed mechanism that could be triggered by the slightest movement. I turned sharply and glanced toward the other side of the room. There, tucked in the corner, was a small, unassuming door that led down to the cellar. I had noted it earlier but dismissed it at the time, thinking it to be an insignificant part of the manor's storage system. But now, my instincts told me that it was far more than that. I could feel the tension in the air. Something was hidden there. something crucial. I made my way over to the door, my mind racing as I considered the possibilities. Had Lord Ashford been trapped by his own design? Was this staircase the key to his disappearance? With a quick motion, I opened the door. It creaked loudly, as if protesting its disturbance. The air inside was cool and damp, a stark contrast to the warmth of the upstairs rooms. I stepped cautiously into the cellar, my footsteps echoing against the stone walls. The space was filled with old crates and barrels, their contents long forgotten. But it was what lay in the corner that caught my attention. A large iron grate was embedded in the floor, its edges rusted with age. The grate was slightly ajar, and a faint, musty smell rose from the gap. I crouched down to examine it more closely. There, in the shadows beneath the grate, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was a faint outline of a body, barely visible beneath the dirt and debris. The body of a man. Possibly, no, definitely Lord Ashford. I pulled myself back up, my heart racing. This was no ordinary disappearance. Lord Ashford had planned his vanishing, but not in the way I had initially suspected. He had staged the entire thing, using the stairs as his way in and out of the manor. The cellar with its hidden passageways had been his escape route. But why? And how had he managed to vanish so thoroughly without anyone noticing? As I retraced my steps back to the study, I reviewed all the facts. Lord Ashford had orchestrated his own disappearance, using the staircase and the hidden cellar to create a series of false clues. But the question remained, why had he done it? Was he testing his guests? Or was there something more sinister at play? I needed answers, and the only way to find them was to speak to the guests once again. I had gathered enough pieces of the puzzle, but the final picture was still obscured. One thing was certain, though. There was more to Ashford Manor than met the eye, and I, Hercule Poirot, would not rest until I had uncovered every last secret. Chapter 5. The Twist. Tears unfolds. The hours dragged on, yet the mystery of Lord Ashford's disappearance seemed no closer to resolution. I, Hercule Poirot, had pieced together enough of the puzzle to see its shape, but the final image eluded me. The staircase, the cellar, the clues scattered like breadcrumbs across the manor. Each was a part of something far larger. But what? That, I knew, was the question that would ultimately lead me to the truth. The events of the evening had not brought us closer to the answer, but the quiet solitude of the manor had. The guests were nervous, their behavior becoming increasingly erratic. It was clear that no one, not even Sir Reginald's attempts at joviality, could mask the undercurrent of anxiety that pulsed through the air. I had, by this time, returned to the study once more. It was there, among the scattered papers and broken glass from the shattered window, that I would find my next lead. My gaze fell upon the desk, specifically the drawer. It had been left slightly ajar. I had seen it before but had dismissed it as irrelevant. Now, however, my curiosity got the better of me. I opened it slowly with great care, and inside I found something remarkable. A map of Ashford Manor. But it was not just any map. This one was annotated. Tiny symbols, arrows, and markings were scrawled across its surface, leading to various rooms in the manor, including the very cellar I had investigated earlier. I examined it closely, noting the peculiar patterns. Some rooms had been circled repeatedly, while others had strange symbols next to them. One room in particular caught my attention, the small hidden chamber behind the fireplace in Lord Ashford's study. The symbol next to it, a triangle with a dot in the center, was one I had seen before in the family's history books. It was the emblem of a long-forgotten Ashford family tradition, a ritual of sorts, one that had not been spoken of in decades. I felt a chill run down my spine. This ritual, if it still existed, could very well be at the heart of the mystery, and it was no coincidence that it was linked to the very rooms I had already investigated. The staircase, the hidden passageways, the cellar, all of them were interconnected in ways I had yet to fully understand. But there was something else that lingered in my mind. Something that had been nagging at me since the moment I first stepped into Ashford Manor. The guests. I had been so focused on the physical clues that I had not truly considered their motivations. What role did they play in this elaborate game? My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned quickly, my hand instinctively moving to the pocket where I kept my revolver. Though I had no intention of using it, unless absolutely necessary. It was Miss Beatrice. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, her voice calm, yet unmistakably tense. "You have been so quiet tonight. Are you closer to the truth?" Studied her for a moment. Her presence, as always, was unsettling. She stood at the threshold of the study, her eyes searching me intently. "I believe I am closer, Miss Beatrice," I replied, my voice measured. "But I must ask you something. Do you know what lies behind the triangle symbol on the map?" Her face betrayed nothing. She looked at me as though I had merely asked a passing question about the weather. "A symbol?" she repeated, her lips curling into a faint, enigmatic smile. "I do not know what you mean, monsieur. The Ashford family is full of old traditions. Perhaps it is simply another one of their eccentricities," I saw through her words. There was more to it than that. I knew it, and I would prove it. But for now, I needed to focus on the next step. I had seen enough to know that the cellar was the key. The map, the symbols, and the hidden passageways all led there. But why had Lord Ashford chosen to hide in the cellar? Was it an escape route? Or was it part of a far darker plot, something that had been hidden from even his most trusted guests? I decided to confront the others. The web of deceit was thickening, but it was still far from complete. The answers lay with them, I was certain. I called for Lady Eleanor, Sir Reginald, and Miss Beatrice to meet in the drawing room. They entered with an air of reluctance as if they already knew the purpose of the meeting. I gestured for them to sit. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice cold and authoritative, "I believe the time has come for us to discuss the truth. I have uncovered enough to know that Lord Ashford's disappearance was no accident. He has planned this disappearance meticulously. But the question remains, why?" The guests shifted uneasily in their seats, but no one spoke. I pressed on, my gaze steady. "I have discovered a map, one that outlines the entire manor and the locations of certain hidden rooms," I continued. "These rooms are tied to the Ashford family's dark past, a past that may have come back to haunt them, but more importantly, there is a symbol that marks one of those rooms, a triangle with a dot in the center. Do you know of it?" Lady Eleanor's face turned pale, and Sir Reginald let out a nervous chuckle. Miss Beatrice, however, remained silent. Her eyes, though, betrayed her. There was a flicker of recognition, quickly masked, but I saw it all the same. "You know something, Miss Beatrice," I said softly, locking my gaze onto hers. "What is it that you know about this symbol?" She hesitated for a long moment, her fingers clasped tightly in her lap. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a ritual. One that has been passed down for generations in the Ashford family, but it has not been practiced in years. Decades, perhaps. It's something they hoped would remain forgotten. I leaned forward, my interest piqued. What kind of ritual? Her eyes darted to the others before she spoke again, her voice trembling slightly. It is said that in times of great need, the Ashford family would call upon the ritual to bring about an end to their troubles. But no one ever speaks of it. They say it was too dangerous, that it led to the disappearance of several members of the family in the past. I stood up, my mind racing. The ritual was real, and it was tied to Ashford Manor's dark history. Lord Ashford had not simply disappeared, he had been a part of this ritual. But why had he chosen to do it now? What had prompted him to bring back an ancient and forbidden practice? I turned back to the guests, my resolve hardening. The truth is within this house, and it will be uncovered. Whatever the Ashford family may have hoped to keep hidden, I, Hercule Poirot, will expose it. Chapter 6. The Final Confrontation. The hours stretched like the slow ticking of a clock, each moment filled with mounting tension. The night had settled into an eerie silence, and the grand halls of Ashford Manor seemed to close in on me, as though the very walls were conspiring to keep their secrets hidden. I, Hercule Poirot, had uncovered enough pieces of the puzzle to see the outline of the truth. But the final piece remained elusive, just out of reach. Lord Ashford's disappearance was no ordinary mystery. It was an intricate web of deceit, history, and dark family rituals that spanned generations. The triangle symbol, the hidden rooms, and the map, each clue pointed to something far deeper, far more sinister than I had initially imagined. The ritual that Miss Beatrice had reluctantly revealed was not just a family oddity. It was the key to understanding Lord Ashford's vanishing act. I stood in the study, my mind working over the details once more. The staircase, the cellar, the symbols, everything was connected, but to what end? And why had Lord Ashford chosen to return to the ritual after so many years? It was clear now that he had staged his disappearance to test something, or someone. But what? I turned sharply as I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. Miss Beatrice, of course. She had been watching me closely since my arrival, her calm exterior betraying none of the anxiety I had seen in the others. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice soft but laced with something darker. You have been busy. I assume you figured out everything. I looked at her, my gaze steady. Figured out everything? Perhaps. But the final pieces still elude me, Miss Beatrice. And you... I paused, eyeing her carefully. You know far more than you let on. She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. You are right, of course. I know more. But I'm afraid you will never understand the full picture, Monsieur Poirot. Not unless you are willing to look beyond the obvious. I watched her, my mind turning over her words. There was something strange in the air between us, a palpable tension that suggested this conversation was not about to end easily. You speak as though there is something I'm missing, I said, my voice calm but insistent. And perhaps you are right. Perhaps there is more to this than I have yet realized. Her lips curled into a faint smile, one that sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. Ah, but you are so close, monsieur. You see, Lord Ashford's disappearance wasn't just about testing us. It was about something far darker, far more ancient. I frowned, my curiosity piqued. Something darker, you say? You speak as though Lord Ashford is dead. She stepped forward, her eyes now fixed on mine, with an intensity that was almost unsettling. Lord Ashford is not dead. At least, Not in the way you think, but the ritual you see, it is not something to be taken lightly. It demands a sacrifice. And I fear that the one sacrificed is not merely a person, but something far more precious. I stared at her, trying to understand her cryptic words. Sacrifice? What do you mean by this, Miss Beatrice? Who or what has been sacrificed? She sighed, a soft, almost regretful sound. You are closer than you realize, Monsieur Poirot. The ritual required more than just Lord Ashford's participation. It required the willing sacrifice of someone with the blood of the Ashford family running through their veins. I felt the weight of her words settle like a stone in my stomach. The pieces were starting to fall into place. The map, the triangle symbol, the hidden passageways, and now the ritual itself. It was all pointing to one thing. Miss Beatrice, I said, my voice steady. Though the realization was sinking in, you are telling me that Lord Ashford, he sacrificed himself, willingly, as part of this ancient ritual? She nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving mine. Yes, monsieur. It was always meant to be this way. The Ashford family has practiced this ritual for centuries. It's a way of ensuring their legacy continues, of ensuring their power endures. But it comes at a price. A price that must be paid. I was silent for a long moment, processing what she had said. So, Lord Ashford, by disappearing in such a manner, was not simply testing us. He was fulfilling this ritual, and perhaps you as well? Miss Beatrice's lips trembled slightly, but she held my gaze. I was the chosen one, yes. But it wasn't supposed to be like this. I was meant to be the one who carried on the legacy, not the one who watched it fall apart. Her words hung heavy in the air, and I understood then. This was more than a mere disappearance. It was a deeply ingrained family tradition tied to power, blood, and fate. But as I looked at Miss Beatrice, I saw something in her eyes, a flicker of fear, a glimmer of doubt. She was not as cold and composed as she appeared, and in that moment I knew there was something more, something that had yet to be revealed. The ritual, it's not just about power, is it, Miss Beatrice? I asked softly. It's about control over death itself, and you are afraid of it? Her eyes widened for the briefest moment, and then, just as quickly, she masked it. But I had seen enough. I don't know anymore, Monsieur Poirot, she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't want this. I didn't want any of it. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. Then tell me, Miss Beatrice, what do you want? She stood there for a moment, her eyes searching mine, as though she were torn between something dark and something she had long ago buried. Finally she spoke, her voice barely audible. I want out. I want to stop the cycle before it consumes us all. The gravity of her words settled in my chest, and I realized then that Lord Ashford's disappearance was not the end of the story. It was merely the beginning of something much larger, something far more dangerous. But now, the final pieces were in place, and I knew what had to be done. Chapter 7. The Final Revelation. The manor was silent now, as if holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable conclusion. I, Hercule Poirot, had reached the end of the road. All the pieces had been laid before me, clues, symbols, and secrets, all pointing to the same grim reality. Yet, as I stood there, in the dim light of Ashford Manor, I could not shake the feeling that the final revelation would bring more than just answers. It would bring consequences. Miss Beatrice stood before me, her face pale and drawn, her hands trembling in her lap, her admission, the fear in her voice. These things had not been mere words. They were the weight of generations, the heavy burden of a family's legacy. The ritual that had been passed down through the ages was not just a test of power. It was a curse, one that had consumed them all. "I want to stop it," she had said. "I want to break the cycle." And yet, as I stood in the study, watching her, I knew that stopping the ritual was not as simple as breaking a chain. The Ashford family's past was a force far more powerful than any one person, no matter how well-intentioned, could undo. The ritual had been designed to perpetuate itself, and Lord Ashford had chosen to embrace it, to sacrifice himself in order to preserve the family's power. But at what cost? The clock on the wall ticked on, its sound growing louder in the quiet room. I had thought for a brief moment that I might find some shred of comfort in the truth, that knowing the answers would bring clarity, but instead it had only left me with more questions. "The ritual, Miss Beatrice," I said, my voice firm, "requires more than just the willing sacrifice of Lord Ashford. It requires the bloodline to continue, to ensure that the Ashford legacy survives. But the truth is, the ritual is not about power. It's about control over life and death." She nodded silently, her eyes filled with a sorrow that seemed to stretch back through time. I continued, "And in that, Lord Ashford, by disappearing, was never meant to simply end his life. He was supposed to create a cycle, one that would perpetuate the Ashford name for generations to come, hidden from the world, insulated in secrecy. But he has not accounted for one thing, the will of others." A soft rustling came from the corner of the room. I turned sharply to see Lady Eleanor entering, her expression grim. She had been quiet ever since the revelations had begun to unfold, but her arrival now seemed more purposeful. "Poirot, you must understand." Lady Eleanor's voice broke the tension. "Lord Ashford's disappearance was the culmination of years of planning. It was his way of ensuring that the Ashford name would be forever protected." I raised an eyebrow. "Protected? From what?" Her eyes flickered as though considering how much to reveal. "From the consequences of what had been done before him. Lord Ashford thought that by disappearing, by sacrificing himself, he would be protecting the rest of the family from the curse that followed them. The curse of the ritual, the price of power." I took a step closer, my mind beginning to piece together the final part of the puzzle. "And you, Lady Eleanor? You knew of this ritual. You knew of Lord Ashford's plan." She hesitated, a long, painful silence hanging between us. "Yes," she whispered, "but I couldn't stop him. No one could. The Ashford legacy runs too deep." I turned to Miss Beatrice, whose eyes were now filled with unshed tears. "And you, Miss Beatrice, you were to carry on this legacy, weren't you?" But something changed. She looked up at me, her voice barely audible. I couldn't be part of it anymore. The family, my family, has been hiding behind this ritual for generations. But it was never supposed to be like this. It was supposed to bring us peace, not destruction. I nodded, understanding now. The Ashford family had been caught in a cycle of their own making, one that had forced them to use dark, forbidden rituals to maintain their power and wealth. Lord Ashford had believed that, by disappearing, he would be the one to end it, to break the chain of sacrifice. But in doing so, he had only set the stage for more suffering. The silence between us stretched, and I could feel the weight of their confessions pressing down on me. But I had one final question. "What about the others?" I asked. "The guests? Sir Reginald? What part did they play in all of this?" Lady Eleanor shook her head slowly, her expression regretful. They were pawns, Poirot, there to be watched, tested. Lord Ashford was not merely testing the loyalty of his family. He was testing the loyalty of all those who were closest to him. He knew that the ritual would involve the sacrifice of a family member, and he needed to ensure that no one would stand in the way. I closed my eyes for a moment, the gravity of the situation sinking in. It was clear now that the ritual was not just an ancient practice. It was a trap, designed to maintain control at any cost. Lord Ashford had orchestrated his disappearance, but in doing so, he had put everyone around him in jeopardy. The guests, the family, all of them had been pawns in a game far larger than any of them could understand. I turned back to Miss Beatrice. And you, Miss Beatrice, have you made a choice? Will you allow the ritual to continue, or will you find a way to break free of the Ashford curse? She hesitated, her face a mixture of fear and determination. I don't know if it's possible, Poirot. I don't know if any of us can escape it. But I knew something she did not. There was always a way to break free. It was never easy, and it was never without consequence. But the will to change, to break the cycle, that was the true power. I stepped forward, my voice calm but resolute. Miss Beatrice, the choice is yours. You can choose to end this madness, to stop the ritual and free your family from the grip of their own making. For a long moment, she simply looked at me, her gaze searching for something I could not provide. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice steady. I'll do it, Poirot. I'll end it. For everyone, I nodded, and for the first time since I had arrived at Ashford Manor, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The mystery was solved. The truth had come to light. But as I turned to leave the room, I knew that the consequences of the Ashford family's dark legacy would echo far beyond this night. The cycle had been broken, but its scars would remain.